Thank you very much, Faz. Thank you for that kind introduction. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's great to be here. Happy birthday, Textkernel. I've watched you from your humble beginnings, and it's great to be here.
Am I allowed to ask you one more question before you warp off at light speed? Right. So, what's your message for today for the audience?
I don't know yet.
Oh.
We've got 45 minutes. I don't really know what's going to happen, and neither do you. But at the end of it, you can decide whether it was worth being here or not.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Bill is going to wing it.
Hi, everybody.
Bill.
And thanks very much for having me. My name is Bill Boorman. I am the Managing Director of Innovation and Technology at Recruiting Daily, which means that I review and look at new tools and technology and what's happening in the market. I do 4 things, really. I work with global organisations on buying technology and deployment. I don't do anything, I don't deliver anything, I don't do anything tactical. I deal with strategy, buying and methodology. I work with about 10 startups, which is work that I really enjoy. I work on product, market position, all that kind of thing, on figuring out what's going on in the market and where we need to go. And I also run True. So I talk to and listen to somewhere between 2,000 to 2,500 people a year around the world. I'll visit somewhere like 65 cities, meeting people and really just trying to understand what's going on in the recruiting and HR space from an operational point of view, an agency point of view, a technology point of view, and try and bottle that into everything. So really the upshot of that is I'm unemployed, and I fill in my spare time looking at technology, and I'm privileged to have been asked to come and talk to you for the next 45 minutes about AI reality and what I think is really going to happen. Because we've seen some sexy stuff today, we've seen some not so sexy stuff today, and I'm going to try and make some sense or some reality out of that from fact or fiction, and actually ask the question, which is the big one, is this data for good? Is this doing good for us in our businesses? But probably more importantly, is this doing good for mankind? Are we actually doing something which is worthwhile, which is making things better or not? Just as a sub-note, in case you're wondering, this is not me. There's an important reason for showing you this, and that's when I was in India. I was in India recently. I ran a couple of events in India, and I was in India, and I was walking along, and people kept coming up and asking to have a selfie taken with me, which was kind of cool. And I was with my customer, who was global head of recruiting at NASPA's, and they said, we're really impressed with this. Like, everywhere we go in the world, people want to have a picture taken with you. Now, nowadays, most people want to take a picture with me because I'm the guy from the videos on the social talent platform. They're never quite sure who I am. I'm the one who's not Johnny Campbell. But everyone wanted a selfie done. And when I kind of said, this is kind of interesting. So the next day, the manager of the hotel comes up to me, and this is a 5-star hotel I'm staying in, and he comes up and he says, can I just have a quiet word with you? He said, do you mind? I know the staff keep bringing you stuff and people keep wanting selfies with you. Is that okay? Is it like spoiling your break? And I said, no, you know, I didn't know my recruiting fame had reached so far, but that's kind of cool. And then he said, can I just ask you one question? I said, what's that? He said, are you really making the remake of the Hangover in India? Which I thought was kind of cool, but there is a point of telling this story, and that is, when this happened, how it started was somebody had spotted me and posted a picture online when I was out looking at a monument, and posted on Facebook and said, Zach is looking around India to make a remake, and it became it was actually reported in the national papers. It was kind of reached that length. And what that did was something that was really interesting. 2 things, really. One was it was a fun story, so it's a good one to tell people over a beer or 2, or 3. And 2, it created a digital footprint for me in India and totally changed the visibility of everything I saw for the next 3 months. Because suddenly people started following me, right, from India and stuff like that, and started sending me stuff about films and locations and catering trucks and all kinds of information. And so the feed, the information, every time I went to Google or I went anywhere online, it created a footprint which said I was actually him and not me. And this is kind of interesting, because when you start thinking about it, what are we? We are what we see. How do we achieve influence in our businesses? How do we source or find the right people? How do we create the right footprint? The only way we do that is by the people that we interact with, right? The interactions that we have creates a footprint. And that's something that we have to think about when we think about the technology that we use and deploy. So this is not me, but it was kind of an interesting story. So one of the trends I want to talk to you about, because this is really important, whenever we've been through a lot of ages, right? An age used to take 100 years in history. If we went from the steam age to the wind age to the stone age, whatever it is, it took at least 100 years for things to change. I have a theory nowadays that it takes 100 days. It takes 100 days for something in my life or my work to change significantly about the way I do it. Because every 100 days, either Google or LinkedIn or Facebook or one of my mobile phone providers, Apple, decide we're going to do something different. We're going to change something. We're going to play around with the algorithms a bit because we like doing that. It's kind of fun. And we're going to change what you are and more importantly, what you see. We're going to change. What is influence? People ask me this all the time. How do you become influential? Influence is visibility. How do I become visible to people? And I only become visible to people if I create a digital footprint. So when we start thinking about this and thinking, right, so if algorithms are so important, if all this technology is so important to what we're doing, what is it we're doing right now? And every time an age changes, every 100 days or every 100 years, two things happen. One is we get a lot of what I call stinky Pete, especially in the data age. Data age is stinky Pete. Stinky Pete is a data prospector. People peddling technology who you think is your friend but is selling that something that doesn't really work. Right? And I see that every day. Snake oil salesmen come along saying, this is going to be the next great thing. So the first point I want to put out is this actually making any difference? If we take a saucer and we reproduce their work in a machine and it does exactly the same thing as a person, maybe it does more, maybe it does it faster, does it do it better? Or is actually what we're doing just emulating human behaviour in machine form, right? Is that going to be the right thing for us? Or is it innovation? Are we using the opportunity to do something different? In our time, if we think about it, we've been through certain ages. We've been through the digital age when we went... Just a quick check, because I want to check the audience. Who in here remembers having a fax machine in the office? Yeah, who remembers having... Most of you, right? So that's kind of interesting, because that puts you in the same category as me. That means you're digital immigrants. That means this stuff isn't natural to you. It's been learned. We've evolved and discovered things. We didn't naturally do that. Remember when you first got a fax machine? Biggest concern my boss had about why we shouldn't buy a fax machine was everyone would fax their mates. That was the concern. That we're going to spend all day faxing jokes about the place and nobody's going to do any work. So not too much has changed really. So that's the way we work. So when we go back to that age, pre-digital, the way that we worked is everything was on paper. People created stuff. If I wanted to hire you, if I wanted to find out about you, if I wanted you to give me data, you would have to come in my office and fill in a form. And I would ask you a load of information, and I would put that form in a filing cabinet. That's what I would do. And when that filing cabinet was full, I would buy another filing cabinet. And I would not look at that information for 7 years. I would keep it for 7 years. I know I kept it for 7 years because that's what the law said I had to do. But I would never look at that form again. I remember one office when we had so many filing cabinets full, we had to reinforce the floor. We haven't actually done that much different when we've gone digital, except the numbers are much bigger. Instead of having 5,000 candidates, we have 1 million candidates, or 1 million people, details of 1 million people. So we're collecting all this data and keeping it in a stored format. All we've really done is emulate, in many cases, paper practices online. We've just increased the numbers. What have we done? So what's our single biggest problem that we've talked about in recruiting for a long time? We've said there's a war for talent. There's a real problem. There's not a war for talent. That's kind of a myth. It's kind of a myth. What there is a finding problem. There's a finding problem because there's too many people. So the technology, we're just emulating problems. The technology issue that we need to solve with what we're building and the way that we're working, and there's certain ways to do that, is actually to solve the finding problem. How do we find the one? How do we get one person for one job? How do we do that? How do we solve that? How do we find the right person? And that is something we should be working towards. Otherwise, we're not really being innovative. We're actually just emulating. We're just doing what we used to do on paper, except on a computer, right? And then now we don't do it on a computer, we do it on a phone. And at some point, we'll do it on a watch or with our car or whatever we do on the internet and things. But we haven't actually sat down and dealt with the most important issue, which isn't the technology that we buy, but the workflow that we have that goes around it. How does this actually change stuff? So I want to share with you a story. So this is something I did recently with one of the companies I'm working with. I had a 3-day hackathon with a whole load of 2 sets of people. This is something you must do if you buy or build technology. If you buy or build technology, you must get it tested and used and ideally integrated by nobody over the age of 15. Right, that's how things work. This is how I test all technology. Every time I produce a report for someone, 2 kids, 14 and 16, 16-year-olds getting a bit old for the job now. It's kind of getting a bit past it, but I get them to test the technology because they understand, they were born in this world, they're digital natives. So they will say, that button shouldn't be there. This shouldn't do that. I don't know what it's supposed to do, but that's how they earn their pocket money, but I know it shouldn't be there. And the other thing we have is, whenever we have a hackathon, we also run a coder dojo, same time. So we have a hackathon where we're going, let's get all the techie people together and build a product. Let's give the same problem to some 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. See what they do with it. It's kind of interesting, the things they think about. And somewhere in the middle is usually the right answer. That's the solution. And kind of kids are cheap to hire as well. So I kind of like that as well. It keeps my return on investment pretty low. So emulation or innovation. So we said, right, here's the challenge. We want to build a source machine. We want to build a source machine, but we want to start from a blank sheet of paper. We don't want to emulate, so we don't want to sit down and talk about how sourcing's done. We don't want to talk about Boolean or anything else. We want to take a whole bunch of people who've never done this before and give them some stuff to look at and think about and build a sourcing machine. This is what we want to do, and this is really relevant to where we are in technology today. So we said, right, so what do we want to do? So if we want to build a sourcing machine, what we want to do is we want to take the best sources we can find as humans, and we want to track their behaviour and thinking and automate that process. Right? Because we said we can find some humans who are really good at this. I know a bunch of them. I know a lot more of them who are not very good at it, but I can take a bunch of people who are good at this and track their behaviours. This is no different to what Google did, right? When we talk about old practices, learning from that, the first computer system I introduced to recruiters, all the recruiters said, we don't have a way of work. Someone shows me a CV and it speaks to me. I look at it and I know it's a good candidate. And yet when we talked to them and said, where do you look? They always looked at the same 4 places on that CV. I was running a sales recruitment business. We said, okay, so if we just give you these 4 pieces of information, that would be what you want. You could make a decision based on that. And they said, yeah. So we said, okay, that's a UI issue. It's not a data issue, that's a design issue. I'm just going to give you these 4 pieces of information because that's what you want. Google did exactly the same thing years later, only they got about 400 recruiters and tracked their eyes to see where they looked. Now we do it much easier by tracking what we call... We watch everything you do, by the way, everything you do all the time with some of the technology. We watch everywhere you look on a website. So we see exactly the same thing. Where do you look, where do you hang about? You don't have to click on something to leave a footprint. And we wanted to use this information by looking at all these great sources and everything else to design a sourcing machine. So I said, right, let's start. What we need to do is talk to everyone and say, let's find a sourcing god. Let's find someone who we all admire and we all worship, speaks at all the conferences, we all think they're great, we hold them up as being the best sourcer, and let's go and find all their information we can find out about them from their background, their history. Let's go and have a look at them and see if we can find any trends. Let's look at their practice and let's track what they do and see if that creates a pattern for us to build this sourcing machine. So this is what we did. The first person we thought of was Glenn and said, that's kind of someone we should look at. So we kind of tried to wire his brain up and say, let's have a look at his behaviour. Let's go through all his content and all his blogs and let's look at his process and his thinking and let's just automate it, right? Because if we automate it, it doesn't matter if he gets run over by a bus tomorrow. We can still carry on doing what he does, right? It becomes dispensable. His boss liked that. He weren't so sure about that principle. But that was the idea, right? So let's look at the behaviour. Because that's actually how most people build stuff. They say, let's look at what we do and let's replicate it, just try and do it in an automated or faster way. And we have some concern with that, which I'm going to come on to. But he wasn't artistic enough, right? So we said, yeah, Glenn's pretty cool. He's very analytical. He does all this really good stuff. But what we need is we need to add a bit of artistic flavour into the game. We need some kind of Eastern European spirit and camaraderie, whatever it is. So we said, let's go and have a look at what Balázs does. And let's take those two things and let's mix the data up and see what does Balázs do that Glenn doesn't. And what does Glenn do that Balázs doesn't? And probably in the middle, if we could mix those two things up, we could kind of have an artistic analyst, which would be kind of cool. Unless they have a love child, we're not going to find another way of doing it, right? So we track people. And this is what we do now when we build technology, is we track behaviours. We look at behaviours, and that's really what machine learning is. Let's look at a group of behaviours. Let's look at a group. If I show you 30 CVs, you reject 10 of them, and you select 10 of them, and 10 of them you put in maybe, I'm looking for the trends in the data points in each of those 10 CVs. That's how we build our technology. So that's what we wanted to do, was just come up with a sourcing machine, and we just kept working the sources to say, let's see what we can come up with. And it was kind of interesting. The next thing we wanted to look at is what's the real problem this is creating us, because once we had the great sourcing machine, we built a dashboard, because that's what you do these days. We built a dashboard and said, that's kind of cool, let's build a dashboard and let's put a funnel on it and let's make it look really nice. And this was the first thing that everyone said to us, that's great, shall I put it with my other 17 dashboards? So this is a real problem we have with technology, is right now too many funnels and too many dashboards, too many people emulating and replicating the same thing. So that was a problem that had to be solved. So we looked at it and said, what are the 4 things we want to do with technology? If you're buying technology now, what are the 4 trends that come out of it if you want to make things work? The first thing, whatever technology you get, is customization. Can I pimp this? This tech's great, but can I make it work for me? That's sometimes a branding issue, right? That's sometimes saying, can I make it look like us? Can I make it feel like us? That's things like changing typefaces, doing stuff like that. You know, sometimes it's a branding design issue. Sometimes it's customization of saying, how do I customize this for every user? One person wants to use this way, one person wants to use it that way. How do I do it differently? And different people want to use different tools. They want different information. So customization is the first thing. If you're going to build a tech stack, if you're going to buy technology, can I customize this? Can I get this right? So that's an AI trend. The second thing, which is kind of key, is workflow. People don't think about this. They think about the technology when they're building technology, but we don't actually think, how is this going to be used in anger? How is this going to change this workflow? If we provide you with this information, a real big one is data reporting, right? That's a massive one for me. We're giving people data reports, but we're providing absolutely no training or understanding in how to use that information. So if you sourcing is a great example. If you go and use my Glenn Cathy Balázs sourcing machine, and it gives you a list of results and says, here's the 5 top results, that is absolutely worthless unless you understand how we got there. And the more that, what we're learning is the more that we automate process, the more we're losing understanding. And it's the fundamental understanding bit which is key. So, the machines make life better, much faster, much quicker, much more consistent, but we lose understanding. So, I would recommend to you, everyone who works in your organisation, they do a minimum of the Java programming on Code Academy. It's completely free. Completely free. You'll learn all about Boolean search, you'll learn all that kind of stuff on Code Academy, right? This is how kids learn in 2 ways. They do Code Academy and Minecraft. If you do those 2 things in your office, you begin to understand how data is formed, how people learn stuff, and you get the understanding. But really, for me, if I give you this technology, how is it going to change the way that you work? Because it's going to be different. Are we adjusting? Are we changing the workflow? And we need to really, and if we're not changing the workflow, don't buy it. And the last thing is education, right? Education. What are we going to do? How are we actually going to teach you? I was really lucky in that I was brought up in a recruitment business in which we measured absolutely everything. I took numbers for everything. I collected data before it was data, before we called it that. And every day, every time you made a phone call, you'd mark a little stick and you'd do a 5-bar gate, and I'd come to you at the end of the day, we'd have a conversation, you'd say, yeah, I've made 30 calls and I've done this, I've had this number of interviews, this number of appointments. And it was the collecting of the numbers and getting the calculator out and worked it out that enabled me to understand what that number meant. And this is the real thing we're really finding today is the problem is that we're providing more and more reports, more and more dashboards, more and more information without a fundamental understanding of what that information is. And privacy by design, that's the other thing. If you're using personal data, how do you design stuff to say, this is my data? This is my data. So if we're going to collect data from multiple sources, the big one at the moment is looking at things like data aggregators and questioning. Actually, there's some civil suits going through actually in terms of them being credit scores if they affect employment. If we're creating profiles on people, we need to make those profiles available for people to tell them that information is there and build privacy by design. We use the information to make our life better. Right, I love some of the stuff we talked about. I love the Google stuff. I love the idea that someone can go to Google and say, find me a job, and it goes searches in multiple sources and comes back and says that. Because the real future is going to be cobots and APIs, right? Open APIs, information flowing together so that when you go and speak and ask for an answer, it will search from multiple sources. Example I was given last week, very simple. Somebody they built a data machine called Val, asked Val and said, I want to buy a cheap bottle of wine to go with lasagna on the way to my sister's house. The information went off. Actually, from a messenger app, it was built on Facebook Messenger, went away and said, let's go in the phone and look at where all the other information is. Right, this is where your sister lives. This is your current location. This is your route. Let's have a look at your bank account. This is what you consider cheap wine to be. Let's look at some wine reviews. This is what goes with lasagna. Let's take some money out of your bank account and pay for it and tell you where you can pick it up on the route. That makes my life easier, using my information. That's in my interest. And this is really what we're building. Think about a time when the candidate will be able to go and say, job, and it will already know what you do, who you are, where to go and look, collect the information, submit your information, look in your diary, arrange your interview for you, and do all that stuff. That makes our life easier. We want that, but we don't want you to report it. We want cobots, not robots, right? Cobots. Collaborative robots, things that work with us to make our life easier through APIs. And we want the information delivered in either Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, or somewhere else. We definitely don't want it on email because that's what old people use. We want it delivered to us in the places where we are, top of our dashboard. And if you talk to any children, if you talk to 15-year-olds, which we interview them quite a lot, they will tell you, I don't want more than 4 apps on my phone. I don't want to download an app, but I want all of the functions of an app, and I want them all to come back to WhatsApp, Slack, Skype, the messenger communication channels that I use. I don't want any more. I don't want to download any more. So this is really when we're talking about machine learning. This is where we are, and we're there now. It's possible. It can be done. It's been done in other industries. How do we deliver technology back to us without a dashboard that enables everyone to do their job better? And I believe that's possible. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bill.